The Doctor Who fandom can certainly be divisive when it comes to stories. Some are universally praised, while others are swept under the rug and just panned. But for me at least, there are some stories that I think either aren't as bad as fans make them out to be, or don't get that much attention. And today we're going to talk about the stories that I think are underappreciated. But before we start, I'm not calling these following stories classics by any means, I just think they have some good in them that makes them worth watching. Without any further ado, let's begin. At number 5 we have Paradise Towers. For a lot of fans this is often considered the worst story of season 24, and oddly for me, I consider it the only good story from that season. A lot of what I like about this story is the bizarreness of it all. A dystopian tower block where society has collapsed and the consciousness of the original architect lurking within the basement. There's cannibal pensioners, gang based on colour, Nazi-like guards and robot cleaners patrolling the corridors. I like it for its campy strangeness, but I think that's what a lot of fans don't really like about it or find off-putting. However, for me, this is the story where the 7th Doctor started to form his own character. For the most of season 24, he's more or less copying the 2nd Doctor, but here we start to see Seven's cleverness and darkness that's commonly associated with him, like when he uses the Caretaker's rulebook to escape. That's a very Doctorish thing to do in my opinion. If there's one thing I don't like about this story, it is Mel, who I find to be a pretty insufferable companion, just a screaming, annoying girl who's pretty useless overall. Plus, the less said about the possessed chief caretaker, the better. Furthermore, part 4 isn't as strong as the previous 3 episodes, but I still think that it is a lot of fun. And overall, Paradise Towers doesn't deserve the hate it gets, as its mixture of humour and horror might have you either thrilled or annoyed. At number 4 we have The Horns of Neyman. This gave season 17 a pretty premature end, as the next story, Sharda, was cancelled due to strikes. This means that this was the last story to use the original theme, the last to have the iconic time tunnel for the opening and end credits, and the last to have music composed by the late Dudley Simpson, who composed nearly all of Doctor Who's music in the 1970s. But with all that aside, I do enjoy The Horns of Neyman for essentially being Theseus and the Minotaur in space, which is what Doctor Who can do really well, take legends from history and give them its own spin. A bull-like alien race called the Neyman set themselves up as gods on planets and then sucked the energy dry from them before moving on to the next planet. I really enjoy this premise, and the Neyman, while looking pretty slow and moving pretty slow, I like how they tower above the cast, and they do have a good screen presence I think, along with pretty sinister voices. Tom Baker and Lala Ward also shine in this story, as Romana takes the lead for a good chunk of the story, while the Doctor is stuck in the TARDIS for the first half, but both look to be having a lot of fun in this story. Not to mention, the special effects in this story aren't too bad considering the budget. If I do have criticism of this story, it's that Graham Crowden's performance as Soldeed is way too over the top, and it comes across as laughable more than anything. With callbacks to famous Greek myths, an interesting premise, great performances from our 2 leads, and good effects work, Horns of Neyman may not have been the best way to end the Graham Williams era, but it's certainly not the worst way. At number 3 we have The Happiness Patrol, often considered one of the worst stories of the 1980s, but for me that's way too unfair. The story is essentially a parody of Margaret Thatcher's Britain, where a tyrannous Helen A rules Terra Alpha and has made sadness illegal. This story has a fine mix of humour and horror, for example the infamous Candyman, a cyborg entirely made out of sweets, and he makes sweets that's so tasty it kills people with a pleasure overload, and public executions where people are killed with strawberry syrup. While on paper that does sound silly, and it is, but the fact that it does take itself so seriously makes the threat all the more real. Furthermore, it does contain the very famous sniper scene where the Doctor talks 2 Happiness Patrol guards out of using their weapons by emphasising the easiness of a kill versus the enormity of ending a human life, but it's one of my favourite moments from the McCoy era, as McCoy is just fantastic in that scene. Plus, it argues the importance of sadness, as it does make us who we are in life, and the fact that the Doctor defeats the villains by turning the rules of their planet against them is also a great moment. Now the story isn't exactly subtle, as I said before, it is a parody of Thatcher's Britain, and wears this like a badge of honour, with Helene being a satire of Margaret Thatcher herself, and the Killjoy workers being a satire of the miners' strike in the mid-80s. While its campiness puts off a lot of fans off this story, for me that all adds to the world building, with great social commentary, a fantastic performance from McCoy, and one that doesn't shy away from its campiness. There is nothing more to say than happiness will prevail. At number 2 we have The Gunfighters. This is one of the pure historicals that wasn't very well received when it came out, but has gained more of an appreciation over time. The story involves the Doctor, Stephen and Dodo getting tied up in the famous gunfight between Doc Holliday and the Clanton family at the OK Corral. They are thrown into situations that involve dangerous and ruthless killers, and one wrong move could get them all killed. The production values are quite good for what they had at the time, and the action is surprisingly quite brutal, but there's some comedy to go with it as well, so it's not a complete downer, but it's not a complete tonal shift either. There was also an attempt to make the story more musical, as the Ballad of the Last Chance Saloon song is used to narrate the story throughout, and while it can get annoying for some, I do find it surprisingly catchy. If I do have criticism though, it's that most of the American accents are either terrible, or some of the actors don't even bother, which is probably for the better. But what I do like most about The Gunfighters is that it did try to be different from the norm of most stories, and I have got to admire it for that. Plus, the TARDIS crew, that is the First Doctor, Stephen and Dodo, are all really having a lot of fun here, and they do their best to hold the production together, and it is really hard not to admire the enthusiasm that William Hartnell and Peter Purves had for Doctor Who. With an attempt to be different from most stories, great action, topped off with some comedy, I can definitely give The Gunfighters an A for ambition. And at number 1 we have The Rings of Akhaten. In 2014, Doctor Who magazine conducted a poll that fans could vote in to celebrate its first 50 years, and this story came in the bottom top 10. The reasoning for this has just baffled me, as according to the majority of Doctor Who fans, it's worse than Love and Monsters, Warriors of the Deep, Curse of the Black Spot, Let's Kill Hitler, Asylum of the Daleks, The Invasion of Time, and too many more to count. I really don't get why fans dislike this story so much. It involves the Doctor and Clara visiting one of the inhabited rings of the planet Akhaten, where they meet the young Queen of Years, Mary, who must sing the long song to a god known as Grandfather. While on paper that doesn't sound like much, it's the execution of it that I think makes this story so fantastic. The way the Doctor and Clara react to the alien market is great stuff and allows for some really effective world building. Plus the aliens in this market don't use money for currency, they use objects of sentimental value. The more valuable it is to the person, the more valuable it is in exchange. It's such an original concept that only Doctor Who could be able to pull off. Clara also has a great moment with Mary Gallel when she reassures Mary about not getting the long song wrong. That really speaks to me on a personal level, and I always try to remain confident when I'm performing on stage, but there's that nagging feeling in the back of my mind that I might get it wrong. While it's not a life or death situation, it's one that's personal but links to the larger conflict of the angry god who could eat the universe if angered. With the stakes personal, effective character building with Clara, a unique alien planet, and Matt Smith's excellent portrayal of the Doctor, The Rings of Akhaten is the story that definitely deserves more appreciation from all of us. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment and subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye.